She came back on a Monday. Not because anyone asked her to. Not because the city had done anything to earn her return. Seoul was exactly as enormous and indifferent as she had left it, its skyline unchanged, its traffic unrepentant, its air carrying that particular blend of food stalls and cold November and something metallic that she had, somewhere in the 6 weeks she was away, started to think of as familiar. She came back because her mother's numbers were better, because Patrick had held himself together in a way that surprised her, and because the savings goal was the savings goal and it did not pause for sentiment. That was what she told herself on the 14-hour flight back. Practical reasons. Visa reasons. Financial reasons. The kind of reasons that lived in spreadsheets and made sense at 3 a.m. when you were trying to explain yourself to yourself. She did not think about a man who had stood at an airport departures drop-off in the flat morning light and looked at her like she was the most inconvenient thing that had ever happened to him and also the thing he was least willing to lose. She did not think about coffee made exactly right without being asked. She thought about her savings goal. She thought about it very hard. She walked back into the Grand Sirac Hotel on a Monday morning with her uniform pressed and her shoes replaced. Finally, she had replaced the shoes, her heel thanked her, and Hyun-ji, who was arranging the front station, looked up and dropped an entire sleeve of cloth napkins onto the floor. "You're back," Hyun-ji said. "I work here," Zara said. "You're actually back." "I just said." "No, I mean..." Hyun-ji pressed her lips together. Her eyes were doing something expressive and complicated that Zara chose not to interpret. "Welcome back," she said, with the particular controlled innocence of someone sitting on information. Within 20 minutes of her return, Zara became aware, through peripheral observation alone, that the restaurant staff had developed what could only be described as a coordinated emotional investment in her life. She caught 2 junior waiters exchanging a look when she walked past. She saw Min-young, the front host, type something on her phone with suspicious speed. She overheard the word Thursday spoken and then immediately swallowed mid-sentence as she rounded a corner. She stopped, turned, looked at the 2 prep staff who had gone very still near the pastry station. "Nothing has changed," she said. Her voice was the same level tone she used for everything. "I am back. I am working. Whatever narrative you have constructed in my absence, dismantle it." She looked at both of them individually. "Do we understand each other?" Both nodded with an enthusiasm that meant nothing. She turned back to her station. Behind her, she heard the soft buzz of a phone and someone typing at speed. Somewhere in the hotel, on a group chat that Zara did not know existed and whose name she would never discover, Hyun-ji sent, "She's back. He doesn't know yet. The board is back in play." The board, in this context, was a physical whiteboard in the staff break room that had appeared sometime in October, which Zara had never seen but which had become a landmark of sorts. Someone had drawn a scale from 1 to 10 labeled Thursday tension, and the staff had been updating it weekly with a dedication that bordered on reverent. It had reached 8.5 the week before Zara left. Someone had drawn a black line through it during her absence. The black line was now, as of Monday morning, erased. The scale was back. The marker was ready. Zara knew none of this. She did her Monday shift with the same focused efficiency she brought to everything, filling every gap before it needed filling, moving through the restaurant like water through narrow spaces, and she went home on the bus and she did not look at her phone, and that night she slept adequately and woke early and put on her new shoes and went back. Thursday came the way Thursdays always came, preceded by 2 days of things that were not Thursday and followed by a shift that Zara had spent zero time thinking about. She set the corner booth. She straightened the cutlery with one precise adjustment. She checked that the still water was chilled. She went to her other tables. At 7:15 she was refilling water at table 3 when the door opened. She did not look up. She finished the pour, set the pitcher down, attended to the elderly gentleman at table 3 who wanted to know if the salmon was wild-caught. She told him yes. She wrote his order. She walked back toward the station and did not, at any point, look at the corner booth. The corner booth was empty. She noted this the same way she noted everything, efficiently, without expression, while her internal architecture performed a small and unauthorized rearrangement that she would not be examining tonight. He was in Tokyo. The flower note had said Tokyo. Perhaps he was still there. Perhaps he had resumed Thursdays on a different schedule. Perhaps he had stopped coming entirely, which was entirely his right and entirely irrelevant to her, because she was here for the salmon orders and the still water and the savings goal, not for. Her phone buzzed in her apron pocket during a gap between tables. She didn't check it until she reached the staff station. Unknown Seoul number. A text message. For words and one period. Thursday resumes next week. She stared at the screen for 3 seconds, put the phone back in her pocket, picked up a water pitcher, went back to the floor. Hyun-ji, who had been watching, updated the board by remote instruction during her break. The number climbed from 0 back to 6. Someone added a small note underneath. He texted. She stared at the phone for 3 seconds. 6. The following Thursday he walked in at 7 exactly, which was when he always arrived, and the restaurant did the thing it always did. The quiet moving through the room table by table, the conversations thinning, the particular social recalibration of people suddenly aware that someone significant had entered their space. Zara was at table 7. She finished the order she was taking. She walked to the entrance. He was standing in the same place he always stood, in the same dark suit, with Sang-woo a half-step behind him and the 2 security men arranging themselves at the perimeter. He looked exactly the same. She had prepared for exactly the same. She had prepared very thoroughly. What she had not prepared for was the way he looked at her, which was not the same at all. It was more open than it used to be. More direct. Like the weeks had worn through whatever careful surface he kept on things, and what was underneath it was simply this. A man who was genuinely, unceremoniously glad to see her. She held out the menu. "Your table is ready," she said. "I know," he said. She led him across the restaurant, seated him, set his menu down. "Still or sparkling," she said, which they both understood was now a ritual with a different meaning than when it started. "Still," he said. Then, before she could turn away, "How is your mother?" She paused. "1 beat. "Better," she said. "Good," he said. She walked back to the station and poured his water, and Hyun-ji appeared at her elbow like a small, emotionally invested ghost. "The tension," Hyun-ji whispered, "is already at an 8. "Go away," Zara said pleasantly, and carried the water to his table. And the Thursday after 6 weeks resumed exactly as though it had never stopped, which was either a comfort or a complication, and she had not yet decided which. The weeks that followed had a texture that Zara could not have described accurately to anyone who asked, which was fortunate because nobody asked. She was too private for most people to probe and too competent at deflection for the ones who tried. But inside the careful management of her daily life, something had shifted with a quietness that made it harder to address. Like a piece of furniture moved 2 inches in the dark. You didn't notice until you walked into the space where it used to be. He asked her things. That was the problem. Not big things. Not the kind of questions that announced themselves as significant. He asked if she had eaten, when she came to take his order late in a rush, in a tone that was so unperformed it disarmed her completely. He asked about Atlanta in pieces, the neighborhood, the light, her mother's garden that she had mentioned once and apparently he had not forgotten. He asked about the book, the one he had returned, whether she had finished it. She had finished it. On the plane. She told him this and then regretted telling him because the small animation in his face when she said it was doing nothing useful for her composure. She developed rules. The rules were sensible and professional, and she committed to them fully. No more than 3 seconds of eye contact. No lingering at the table after delivering the order. No answering the questions about Atlanta because those answers led to conversations and conversations led to the thing she was managing, which was feelings that had no practical home in her life. She broke the eye contact rule on the first Thursday, the food rule on the second, and the Atlanta rule on the third when he asked about her mother's garden in November, and she found herself describing the exact smell of her mother's gardenias before she caught herself and stopped and looked at the floor with the expression of someone who had walked off a step they didn't see. He said nothing, just waited. And the waiting was somehow the worst part. On the 4th Thursday she brought him sparkling water. She had been doing 3 things simultaneously and her hand reached for the wrong bottle, and she didn't notice until she set it down and looked up and found him looking at the glass with an expression of mild attentiveness and then at her face. "That wasn't me," she said, already reaching for the glass. "It was definitely you," he said. "I have other tables." "You do," he agreed. And his tone was so even and so warm at once that she took the glass away with a speed that was slightly undignified and did not look back. And behind her he sat in the corner booth with the faintest smile on his face, and the restaurant moved around him, and Hyunji updated the board to 9 for the first time in its history. The following week he left a book under the water glass. Not money. A book. Worn paperback, the spine slightly bent. A page near the middle with a small turned corner. She recognized it before she picked it up. It was the one she had been reading on his shelf during those 3 days. She had left it behind when she packed. She had told herself she forgot it. She had known she left it on purpose, as though a small part of her needed to leave something behind that wasn't herself. He had kept it for 6 weeks. Now he was giving it back. She stood at the staff station with the book in both hands, and Hyunji appeared and looked at it and then at Zara's face and said nothing at all, which was so out of character that it was its own kind of statement. Zara put the book in her bag and went home and did not read it that night because reading it would mean something and she was not ready for what it meant. She read the turned-down page at 6 in the morning with her coffee. It was a passage about returning, about how a person could leave a place completely and still leave something of themselves in it, and how returning to find that thing still there was its own kind of answer. She closed the book, looked out her apartment window at the Seoul morning. She admitted to herself in the quiet of 6 a.m., in a significant amount of trouble. And if you felt that, if you have ever held something in both hands and known it was already changing you and been unable to put it down, then you already know exactly where this is going, and I need you to stay because it is about to get so much worse before it gets better. Give this video a like right now, it helps more than you know, and subscribe if you are new here because we are absolutely not leaving this story here. Drop a comment and tell me, would you have read that page? Because I think you know the answer. Let's keep going. She found out about Jian on a Tuesday. Not from Joon-ho. Not from Sang-woo. From the internet, which was arguably worse, a social column on a Seoul lifestyle site, the kind of page that existed for the sole purpose of documenting where significant people ate and who they ate near. The headline was modest by that world's standards. Something about the Seoul group heir and a sighting at a private dinner, accompanied by a photograph of a woman who was, objectively, the kind of beautiful that made rooms rearrange themselves. Zara read the article the way she read everything. Once, completely without stopping. Then she put her phone in her pocket and went to refill table 4's water and thought nothing about it, which was a thought she had very thoroughly for the rest of the shift. Her name was Han Jian, old Seoul family. The kind of old that came with a particular fluency in the city's invisible social architecture. She was 31, worked in cultural preservation, had a foundation, gave speeches. The column described her and Joon-ho as having a long-standing connection, which was the specific phrasing of people who knew more than they were printing. Zara did not think about this. She thought about it 0 additional times on the bus ride home. She slept without dreaming and woke at 5 and made her coffee and stood at the window and felt completely fine. Jian came to the restaurant that Thursday. Not for dinner, it turned out, or not only for dinner. She arrived at 6:45, before Joon-ho, and was seated by Min-young with a care that suggested some advance notice had occurred somewhere in the management chain. She was exactly as the photograph had suggested, composed in the way that wealth applied from birth made people composed, wearing something the color of late evening that required no accessorizing. She sat with the particular ease of a person who had never needed to calculate whether she belonged somewhere. Zara noted all of this in the time it took her to cross the restaurant with a bread basket. At 7 exactly, Joon-ho arrived. He saw Jian at the table before he saw anything else, and something passed through his expression. Not warmth, exactly, but recognition, and the slight adjustment of a person encountering a social situation they had not arranged. He sat. They spoke. Zara was assigned to another section for the duration because Min-young had made a management decision and communicated it via eye contact alone. Hyunji's contributions to the staff group chat during the following 40 minutes constituted what would later be described as a live literary event. 7:09, Jian touched his hand. He moved it to his water glass. The water glass is doing more work tonight than any of us. 7:14, Zara is at table 3. She is pouring water. She is pouring a lot of water. The guest is looking at his glass with concern. 7:18, the glass is full. It has been full for 30 seconds. She does not know. We know. 7:19, she knows. She is replacing the napkin. Her face is a painting. Zara replaced the napkin with the efficiency of someone who had definitely not been standing at that table for 30 seconds, overflowing a water glass due to peripheral distraction. She walked back to the station. She straightened the already straight cutlery. She breathed through her nose for 2 seconds. She was fine. Jian left at 8:15. On her way out she paused. Deliberately, Zara registered, near the station where Zara was completing a check. She had the manner of someone who enjoyed the full use of a room. "You're his Thursday waitress," Jian said. Not unkind. Almost warm. The particular warmth of a woman who had correctly assessed the terrain and was comfortable with her position in it. "He's mentioned the restaurant often. You must take wonderful care of him. His Thursday waitress." Zara looked up from the check. Her face was composed and her voice, when it came, was professional and smooth. "We appreciate his continued patronage," she said. Jian smiled, moved on. The faint trail of something expensive lingered for a moment and then the restaurant absorbed it. Zara finished the check, tucked it in the folder, walked to the service corridor and into the walk-in refrigerator and stood in the cold for 90 seconds with her eyes closed, which was something she was absolutely not doing for the reasons anyone watching might assume. She was warm. It had been a warm evening. This was temperature regulation. She went back to the floor. Sang-woo was waiting outside the hotel after her shift. He did not look comfortable being there, which Zara had noticed was his baseline whenever their conversations involved the thing neither of them named directly. "She's not what you think," he said, when she stopped in front of him. "I don't think anything," Zara said. "She arranged the dinner herself." "He didn't." Sang-woo. Her voice was even. "I'm a waitress. He's a client. What happens at his table when I'm not holding the water pitcher is information I have no use for." Sang-woo looked at her with the expression of a man who had been professionally trained to read situations and was currently being asked to pretend a situation was not one. "He's going to say something similar when you ask him," he said. "I thought you might prefer to hear it from someone who doesn't have a reason to perform neutrality." She stood on the pavement with the evening traffic moving past and something cold tracing the back of her neck that had nothing to do with the November air. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. Sang-woo considered this question for a moment with genuine thoughtfulness. "Because I have watched him go to a restaurant every Thursday for a year, and I have watched him read a file at midnight, and I have watched him sit on a waiting bench for 11 minutes because a woman handed him a buzzer instead of a table, and I am—" he paused, as though the next words cost him something. "Tired of watching two people be very intelligent about everything except the obvious." He put his hands in his pockets and walked away. Zara stood on the pavement for a moment after he left. Then her phone buzzed. Unknown Seoul number. She knew it now. She answered before it rang twice, which she would have words with herself about later. "She is not a thing." His voice, even and direct across the line. Silence for a beat. "I don't know what that means," she said, which was a lie. "Jian. She is not a situation. She is not something you're looking at from table 3 while you overflow someone's water glass." The pause that followed had its own weather system. "Who told you about the water glass?" she said. Sang-woo. Sang-woo needs a different hobby. Zara. She pressed her free hand flat against the cold wall behind her. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I think you need to hear it." "Why do you care what I need to hear?" The pause this time was his, and it carried the particular weight of a man choosing his words not for impact but for accuracy. "Because I care what you think," he said. "Specifically. About this. About me." She closed her eyes. The traffic moved past. Somewhere down the block someone was selling something warm that smelled of cinnamon, and the city pressed its enormous indifferent self against her from every direction. "This is not information I required," she said, and her voice was steady. She made sure of it. "And yet," he said. She hung up. She stood outside with her phone in her hand and let the two words sit there in the air where he had left them. And yet, she put her earphones in and walked to the bus stop and told herself, for the full 40-minute ride home, that she was absolutely, completely, thoroughly fine. She was 9 kinds of not fine. She knew this because she opened the book that night. The turned-down page. She read it again. Then she lay in the dark and stared at the ceiling and thought about a woman the color of late evening, who had called her his Thursday waitress with the smooth certainty of someone who had mapped the room and found herself at the center of it. Then she thought about a man who had called to tell her it wasn't true before she had even admitted to herself that she needed to know. That was the part she couldn't quite flatten. The part that wouldn't lie down and stay file-shaped and manageable. He had known. Without her saying anything, without a visible crack in her performance, he had known exactly what Jian's presence had cost her, and he had picked up his phone before she reached the bus stop. She had been seen again, without permission, without warning, by someone who could not seem to look at her any other way. She pulled the blanket up and closed her eyes and thought about the savings goal with extraordinary determination. The savings goal was very boring tonight. She thought about the water glass. She thought about, and yet. Eventually she slept, and in the morning she got up and put on her shoes and went back to the restaurant and was a professional, which was the thing she was best at being, and the days moved forward, and the Thursday after that he came and she seated him and brought his still water without being asked, and when she came to take his order he looked up at her and said nothing at all, and she said nothing at all, and the silence between them had more content in it than most conversations she'd had. All week, the board in the break room stayed at 9. Someone added a question mark. The gala announcement went up on the hotel's internal board on a Wednesday, which gave Zara exactly 2 days to note its existence and move on with her life. Grand charity function, Saturday evening, full restaurant staff required for event floor duty, black formal uniform, 7 to midnight. She noted it. She moved on. She did not note the name listed under principal donors. She skimmed that section with the focused non-attention of someone who had made a deliberate choice about what information they were and were not absorbing this week. She signed her name in the staffing column, collected her event briefing sheet, and went back to her tables. It was Hyun-ji who told her, approximately 45 minutes before the gala began, while they were both in the staff room pinning their name badges, that Kim Joon-ho was confirmed attending. "Thank you for that timing," Zara said. "I thought you knew," Hyun-ji said, with the specific expression of someone who had known she didn't know and had made a calculation about when to tell her. "Did you think that before or after you confirmed my name was on the floor schedule?" Hyun-ji smoothed her collar with great attention. "The event is going to be very elegant," she said. "The flower arrangements alone." "Hyun-ji, you look very professional in the formal uniform," Hyun-ji said, and fled. Zara stood in the staff room for a count of 5. She pinned her badge. She checked that her hair was correct. She picked up her tray and walked out into the gala. The hotel's main event floor had been transformed in the way that serious money transforms spaces, not loudly, but completely. Long tables, low flowers, light that made everyone look like a better version of themselves. The kind of room that reminded you that elegance was just wealth made comfortable. Zara moved through it the way she moved through every room she worked in, efficiently without waste, reading the geography in the first 3 minutes and filing it for later. She was carrying a tray of champagne through the east corridor at 8:20 when she saw him across the room. He was standing with a group near the central table, a cluster of serious-faced people in serious suits, the kind of gathering where the conversation was exclusively about things that had real consequences. He was nodding at something someone had said, and in the moment before he looked up, Zara had about 2 seconds to recalibrate. She turned, with purpose, walked in the direction she had come from and arrived at a large floral arrangement near the west wall which she stood behind and found suddenly very interesting. She was not hiding. She was conducting a visual assessment of the centerpiece, which was large and elaborate and had clearly been constructed by someone who felt strongly about peonies, and it was directly in her sight line of the catering station, which she needed to. "Are you hiding?" said a voice behind her. She turned. He was standing 2 feet away with the patient expression of a man who had crossed a room specifically for this moment. He had done it quickly. She had miscalculated his peripheral vision. "I'm inspecting the centerpiece," she said. He looked at the centerpiece, then at her hands, which were holding a champagne tray, then back at her face with an expression of perfect, controlled amusement. "You're holding a champagne tray like it's a shield," he said. "It's called multitasking," she said. "The peonies look very inspected. They're well arranged." "Zara, I have a floor assignment, she said. I know. He didn't move. Neither did she. Around them the gala moved in its careful orchestrated way, people in expensive clothes doing expensive things, and in the small pocket of quiet beside the peony arrangement 2 people stood with 3 feet of professional distance between them and something much shorter than that underneath it. You didn't know I'd be here, he said. Not a question. I was informed, she said. Recently. I would have told you. It doesn't matter. It matters to you. I can see it. I am working, she said, and her voice had a note in it that was doing double duty. Professional composure on the surface and underneath it the real thing, the live edge of something that had been sitting close to the surface for 3 weeks and did not enjoy being this visible. This is my workplace. You are a donor. There are 140 people in this room who are not standing behind a floral arrangement having this conversation. That's true, he said, and then quietly, come out to the terrace, just for 10 minutes. There's a view of the river. She looked at him. I can't, she said. It's a 10-minute break. It's a break I'd spend with a donor at a private gala that my management can observe from 4 different angles. I'll speak to management. Please, she said, and the word came out with more heat than she intended, low and controlled but real. Do not speak to my management. That is the last thing I need you to do. I am here doing my job. You being here makes that harder. I don't. She stopped herself. Reset. I will find you before the night ends, she said, which was more than she had planned to offer, and she saw him register it, the slight change in his stillness. But right now I need to work. He held her gaze for a moment. Then he stepped back. I'll wait, he said. She turned away from him and walked with absolute composure back into the floor, and did not look back, and was professional for the next 2 hours in a way that required slightly more of her than usual, and that she would not be documenting anywhere. At 10:30 there was a lull between courses, and she was near the terrace doors, and he appeared beside her with the specific navigation of a man who had been tracking the event schedule. They stepped outside. The Seoul night was cold and brilliant. The Han River was below and to the left, the city lights trembling in it. He stood beside her at the railing, and neither of them said anything immediately, and the silence was the good kind. Not empty, just full of things that didn't need words yet. Jian is here, Zara said, because she had seen Jian across the room at 9, and the knowledge had been sitting in her pocket all evening like a small stone. I know, he said. She came to the restaurant. On your Thursday. I know that too. She called me your Thursday waitress. The pause was brief. She was wrong, he said simply. Was she? She kept her eyes on the river. What am I, then? Accurately. Not in a way that sounds better than it is. What is this, actually, to you? She turned to face him because she had learned that difficult questions got better answers when you looked at the person receiving them. Because I have a very full life, Joon-ho. I have a mother getting better in Atlanta and a brother who still needs watching and 2 jobs and a visa and a savings goal, and I do not have room in any of that for something that isn't real. So tell me honestly, is this real? He turned from the river to look at her, and his face in the cold air was completely unguarded, the careful surface fully gone, and what was underneath it was simply this. Something certain and unhurried and entirely unperformed. You are not a habit, he said. You are not a routine. You are not the restaurant or the Thursday or the memory of someone who used to sit there. He held her gaze. You are the most awake I have felt in 3 years. That is what this is. The city burned below them. She heard the gala through the glass doors, the music and the careful laughter and the 140 people who were not on this terrace. That doesn't make it simple, she said. But her voice was different now. The edge was still there, but it had changed its direction. No, he said. She turned back to the river. A beat, too. I have to go back inside, she said. I know. The Jian situation is not a situation. Sang-woo said the same thing. Sang-woo was right. She will hear it directly from me this week. She nodded once. Then, quietly, looking at the river and not at him because some things were easier when you weren't being seen entirely. The most awake you've felt in 3 years. Yes, he said. She let the word exist. Then she went back inside. He followed 2 minutes later. They did not speak again that night, and they did not need to. The board was updated to 9.5 by morning. Someone added a second question mark. Somebody else drew a small flame next to it, and the marker was never identified. The gossip column published on a Thursday morning, which was the kind of timing that suggested either very bad luck or a very attentive photographer, and Zara read it on her phone on the bus to her morning shift and felt the day rearrange itself before it had properly begun. The headline was restrained by the standards of the form. A paragraph about the Grand Sirak Hotel's continued status as a preferred destination for Seoul's most notable figures. A mention of the Gala. A photograph that had been taken through the restaurant window. She could tell by the angle, the slight convex distortion of it. That showed a woman in a black uniform leaning over a corner booth table, her head tilted slightly toward the man seated there, close in the way that attention made people close without their permission. It looked like exactly what it wasn't. She read the caption, which used the phrase intimate regular appointment, and put her phone face down in her lap and watched the Han River Bridge pass beneath the bus. By the time she reached the hotel, the paragraph had traveled. She could feel it. Not in anything anyone said directly, because the staff were collectively invested enough in the situation to know better than to bring it to her unprepared, but in the quality of the glances, the extra half-second before eyes moved away, the way Min-young said good morning with a careful gentleness that communicated volumes. She changed into her uniform. She tied her apron. She went to her station. At 11:15, her manager's assistant came to tell her there was a meeting requested. The room was small and neutral and contained her manager and the hotel's guest relations director, who had come specifically for this conversation, which told Zara most of what she needed to know before anyone spoke. They were kind about it. They used phrases like professional boundaries and the hotel's public position and entirely in your interest with a care that was real and therefore slightly worse than if it had been cold. The guest relations director mentioned once the word optics. Zara sat with her back straight and her hands in her lap and looked at each of them in turn and said very little. What she thought during the 15 minutes of this meeting was the following: that she had worked in this restaurant for 13 months. That she had covered shifts that weren't hers and trained staff who were later promoted above her and filled every gap before it needed filling and been, by any measurable standard, exactly what this place required. That she had done all of this while running 2 jobs and sending money home and managing, in parallel, a life that most people would have found exhausting to observe. And that a photographer with a telephoto lens and a paragraph of suggestion had done more damage to her professional standing in 24 hours than 13 months of careful, excellent work had built. She thanked them for their time and walked out. She went to the walk-in refrigerator. She stood in it for 90 seconds. It was not enough. She went back to the floor and she worked her shift and she was impeccable at it, which was the only form of dignity available to her today. And when her shift ended, she walked to the bus stop and rode across the city to the diner and she worked that shift too. And when she got home at 6 in the morning, she sat at her kitchen table with her hands flat on the surface and breathed. Then she called her mother. Zara Thomas answered on the first ring, which meant she had been awake, which meant she already knew something, which meant Patrick had talked and Patrick was going to receive a separate conversation later. "Tell me," her mother said, and Zara did. All of it, for the first time completely, the Thursdays, the brother's debt, the 3 days, the book, the terrace, the column, the meeting, all the things she had described when they came up as nothing relevant. Her mother listened to all of it without interrupting, which was how Zara knew she considered it serious. "Baby," Diana said when Zara finished. "I know," Zara said. "No, listen to me. When are you going to let somebody?" "Mama, it's complicated. You have been saying complicated since you were 20 years old, and every complicated thing has turned out to mean I'm scared, but I won't say that. I'm not scared. You built a wall," her mother said, with the directness that had always been her defining quality. "And you called it self-sufficiency, and it kept a lot of things out that shouldn't have been kept out. That wall has served you. I know why you built it. But a wall that never comes down stops being protection and starts being a prison." Silence. "He remembered your coffee," Diana said. "Mama." "He sat on a bench with a number buzzer. That was. He called you from across the world to tell you a woman wasn't a thing. That doesn't." Zara Thomas. Her mother's voice, firm and warm and completely certain. At some point love is not the complication. It is the answer. And you are smart enough to know the difference and stubborn enough to refuse it, and I am telling you, as your mother who has known you for 27 years, that this is the moment where stubborn stops being a virtue. Zara sat at her kitchen table in the Seoul morning with her hands flat on the surface and her throat doing something she controlled with one careful breath. What if it costs me everything I've built? She said quietly. What if not doing it costs you more? Her mother said. She sat with that for a long time after the call ended. Thursday arrived 3 days later and Joon-ho came at 7 exactly and Zara seated him and brought his water, still without asking, and took his order and delivered his food and refilled his glass once, and when he left she found something under the water glass that was not money and not a book. It was a small card. Hotel-quality paper, not the restaurant's brand, his. 3 lines in handwriting she recognized from a note about Tokyo weeks ago. The column was not your fault. The meeting was not acceptable. I should have been more careful with what was visible. I'm sorry. She stood at the station with the card in her hand and Hyun-ji at her elbow, reading it over her shoulder with no apology for doing so. 9.5, Hyun-ji said reverently. Stop reading my cards, Zara said. 9.5, Hyun-ji said again. 3 days after that, the guest relations director called Zara back into the small neutral room and told her, with a professionalism that had clearly been instructed from above, that the situation had been reviewed and that the hotel valued her contributions and that the reassignment had been an overreaction to a circumstance that was, on reflection, entirely without foundation. She was being reinstated to the restaurant floor effective Monday. Zara sat across from the guest relations director and said, "Thank you," with exactly the same expression she had worn during the first meeting, which communicated everything. She did not ask who had made the call. She didn't need to. She knew the shape of things handled from above. And that, she thought on the bus ride home, was the problem. Not that he had fixed it. Not that it was fixed. But that it had happened, again, in the pattern she recognized now too clearly to pretend otherwise. A problem in her life, a solution that arrived from his direction, and her name nowhere in the decision. Even when he meant well. Especially when he meant well. She got off the bus 2 stops early and walked the rest of the way through the cold evening air, and by the time she reached her building she had made a decision that sat in her chest with the particular settled weight of things that couldn't be unmade. Not an ending. She was honest enough now to know it wasn't an ending. But a conversation. A real one. The kind they hadn't had yet, where she put everything down in front of him without management or performance and let it land where it landed and trusted herself to survive whatever came after. She went upstairs. She made tea. She sat at the window with the Seoul night burning beyond the glass, and she stayed up until 1 in the morning composing the most important thing she had ever been too afraid to say, and she was not afraid of it anymore. Tomorrow, she decided, was the day. She went to his office on a Thursday morning. In her hotel uniform because she had an afternoon shift and because she had made the decision at 1 in the morning and going home to change would give her too much time to reconsider and she was not giving herself that time. She took the subway to Uedo and walked into the lobby of the glass tower with the particular stride of a woman who had rehearsed nothing and was going anyway, and she walked up to the same receptionist. Perfect posture, practiced neutral expression, the institutional memory of a young woman who had seen Zara exactly once before and clearly filed her accurately. "I'm here to see Kim Joon-ho," Zara said. "Do you have an appointment?" "No." The receptionist looked at her for the half-second of a professional calculation. "Mr. Kim doesn't. Tell him Zara Thomas is in the lobby," Zara said. "He'll decide." She sat down in the lobby chair. She sat with her back straight and her hands in her lap, and she waited with the patience of a woman who had decided the outcome and was now simply waiting for the building to catch up. 6 minutes. Then the elevator opened and Sang-woo came out, looked at her and looked briefly, silently upward at a point somewhere above the lobby ceiling in the manner of a man offering a brief and private expression of gratitude to an unnamed party. "Ms. Thomas," he said. "Sang-woo," she said. "He's ready for you." "Of course he is," she said, and stood up and followed him into the elevator, and they rode to the 38th floor in the same wordless mutual respect they had established months ago in a different elevator in a different context, and she appreciated that he still didn't try to make small talk. The corridor. The double doors. Sang-woo knocked once and opened them, and she walked in and heard them close behind her. The office was exactly as she remembered it. Clean lines. Dark wood. Seoul laid out behind him through the floor-to-ceiling windows like something he had earned the view of. Joon-ho was standing behind his desk with his jacket on and no readable expression, and she noticed, with the part of her brain that noticed everything, that he was standing rather than sitting, which meant he had been standing before she arrived, which meant he had known this was different the moment his name reached the lobby. She stopped in the middle of the room. "I have a list," she said. He said nothing, but his posture changed, a slight and complete settling, like a man whose muscles had been held carefully and were now, with one permission, releasing. He folded his hands. He waited. "Condition 1, Zara said. She had not written this down. It was in her chest and had been all night, and she delivered it plainly. You do not handle things that are mine to handle without asking me first. I don't care what the situation is. I don't care if the building is actively falling down. You ask. I decide. That is a line and it doesn't move." "Understood," he said. "I mean that. Not agreed to and then adjusted when you decide the situation warrants it. Understood and adhered to. Full stop." "Full stop," he said. She held his gaze for a beat, checking it, and what she found there was not compliance or performance. It was acknowledgement, the real kind, settled and without negotiation. "Condition 2, she said. "I am not a variable in anyone's equation. Not the Choi Group. Not a gossip column. Not the guest relations director of the Grand Sirak Hotel. If being in proximity to you puts me in the position of being anyone's message or anyone's leverage or anyone's photograph, then this," she paused. "Whatever this is ends. Not as a threat, as a limit. I have worked too hard and built too carefully to be a footnote in someone else's story." "You are not a footnote," he said, and something in his voice had an edge to it that was directed outward and not at her. "The column, the hotel meeting, those will not happen again. I was careless with what was visible. That was my failure." "I know it was," she said. "I'm not asking for accountability. I'm asking for the condition." "You have it," he said. She nodded. A pause. And here was the one she had written and rewritten at 1 in the morning. The one that had made her sit at the window for an hour trying to find the version that was honest without being more than she was ready to give. "Condition 3, she said. "If you make me coffee, you make it right. You have set an entirely unreasonable standard, and I expect it maintained indefinitely." The silence that followed this had a different quality than the others. He looked at her across the width of his desk and the office and the careful professional distance she had built and maintained since October, and the real smile came. Not the almost, not the controlled almost version she had catalogued on Thursday mornings. The full one. The one that rearranged his face and made him look like a person rather than a position, and she had seen it exactly twice before and had been trying not to need to see it again since both times. "The coffee," he said. "It's a very important condition. It's the most important condition." He agreed, and the warmth in his voice was total and unhurried and aimed entirely at her. She stood in the middle of the office and let out a breath she had been holding since 1 in the morning. "This is still complicated," she said. "Completely," he said. "My mother is in Atlanta." "I know. I still have 2 jobs." "You could have 1, he said. "In a field you choose." "I want to be clear, that sentence is not a purchase. It is a sentence." "I heard it the first time," she said. "I'm still deciding what to do with it." "That's fair. Your world is dangerous." "Less than it was," he said. "Working on the rest." "Sang-woo hates this. Sang-woo will survive." From directly outside the closed double doors, perfectly audible. "I am standing right here," Sang-woo said. "I have been standing here this entire time." The laugh came out of Zara before she could stop it. Real and unguarded. The kind that used her whole face, and she watched him register it with the expression of a man who had been waiting for that specific thing without knowing he was waiting for it. She walked toward the desk. Not quickly. She didn't move toward things quickly. She moved toward them with full intention. And she stopped 2 feet away and looked at him directly and said, "The Thursday table. What about it?" he said, and his voice was quieter now. "Is it still mine?" He looked at her for a moment in which the office and the city behind him and the 38 floors of Seoul below them were very quiet. "It was always yours," he said. She closed the remaining 2 feet, and when she reached for his hand, he was already turning his palm up to receive hers, and their fingers closed, and the contact was simple and complete, and neither of them said anything for a moment because some things arrived full and did not need translation. Outside, in the corridor, Sang-woo put his hands in his pockets and walked away and pulled out his phone and sent a message to a contact listed as Hyunji Hotel. A contact he should not have had in any professional context, and yet, that read, done. And in the break room of the Grand Sirak Hotel restaurant, at some point in the following hour, a hand picked up the whiteboard marker and drew a single small heart next to the 9.5 on the Thursday tension tracker. Nobody erased it. Nobody tried. 3 things happened in the weeks after the office. The first was that Joon-ho came on Thursdays and she seated him and brought his still water and took his order, and the air between them was different now in the way that air changed after rain. The same air, the same room, but cleaner. The charge in it resolved into something you could breathe without effort. The staff noticed. The board, which had served faithfully for months as the emotional weather station of the restaurant, was updated one final time to a number that required discussion and then retired with ceremony into the break room cabinet, where it was kept because no one wanted to be the person who threw it away. The second was that Min Young, the front host, stopped flinching when Joon-ho arrived. She had developed, over 13 months, a fear response to his presence that was partly about his position and partly about the second-order consequence of whatever happened when Zara and he occupied the same air. Now that the consequence had resolved itself, she found she could breathe again. She even, one Thursday in December, smiled at him with something approaching genuine warmth. He nodded at her once. She told Hyunji about it for 4 days. The third thing was that Jian stopped coming to the restaurant, which Zara was informed of by Sang-woo with no additional commentary, and which she received the same way. She had made peace with Jian as a concept, had come to understand, through the accumulating evidence of who he actually was, that the careful, surface-level world of expectation and arrangement that Jian represented was the exact world that Joon-ho had been quietly dismantling for 3 years in the interest of something he hadn't been able to name until a woman handed him a buzzer on a Tuesday. She told him this once, on a Saturday morning in December, in his kitchen, over the coffee that was always exactly right. She said it straightforwardly because she had learned, at some cost, that the things you kept inside for protection eventually cost you more than the things you said out loud. He looked at her across the kitchen counter and said, "You are the only person I have ever met who explains my own life back to me more accurately than I can explain it myself." "I'm observant," she said. "You're extraordinary," he said, which was so plain and direct that she looked briefly at her coffee cup to recover herself. "Don't," she said. "Don't what? Don't say things like that at 8 in the morning. I haven't fully loaded yet." He smiled. The full one. She had stopped trying to file it. She just let it land where it landed now, which was the only sustainable option. Her mother called that afternoon and Zara answered in the living room while Joon-ho was somewhere in the study doing the kind of weekend work that powerful people could never fully put down, and Diana Thomas's voice on the line had the warm, raspy quality of a woman whose numbers had been good for 6 consecutive weeks and who sounded, increasingly, like herself again. "Tell me something," Diana said. "Good morning, Mama." "It's afternoon." "Good afternoon, Mama. Are you happy?" her mother asked. Zara sat in the living room of a penthouse that was still slightly too large for her comfort, but that she had stopped being daunted by, with Seoul burning outside the windows and the smell of coffee still in the air, and the sound of someone working in the next room, whom she had handed a buzzer on a Tuesday 11 months ago, and who had sat down on a bench and waited. "Yes," she said. She didn't add anything to it. It was the truest thing she had said in years, and it didn't need decoration. Diana was quiet for a moment. Then, "Good," she said, and the word was full. "That's all I ever wanted for you. Not the work or the money or the saving or the fixing. Just that." "I know," Zara said. And this time the words meant what they always meant and also something more. She knew it now in the full sense, the embodied sense, the sense that lived in the part of her that had spent 8 years performing strength and was only now, slowly, learning that strength was not the same as armor. She stayed on the call for an hour. Patrick came on at the end and was mercifully, for once, not annoying about any of it. He asked one pointed question, "Is he good to you?" And when she said yes, just yes, he made a sound that was half satisfaction and half the private relief of a younger sibling who had watched his sister carry more than her share for longer than she should have. "Good," he said. You deserve that. He paused. Also, I'm thinking about Seoul again. Patrick. Just visiting, he said too quickly. If you get into anything, visiting, purely, as a tourist. As a tourist, she repeated, with the tone of a woman who had Patrick translated this and found it approximately 60% credible. I love you, Z, he said. I love you too, she said. Don't do anything I have to clean up. She hung up and sat in the afternoon light for a moment and felt the shape of her life, which was still complicated and still imperfect and still held together in places with effort and intention, but which had, in the past months, acquired something it had been missing. Not someone to carry it for her. She had never wanted that and wouldn't have accepted it. But someone to stand beside her while she carried it. Someone who made the coffee right and remembered the details and looked at her with the full weight of his attention and didn't try to simplify what was real. Joon-ho came into the living room at some point and found her by the window and sat beside her without asking if she was okay, because he had learned that asking if she was okay when she was clearly fine was the one habit she found genuinely irritating. He sat with her in the quiet, and after a while he said, Your mother. She sounds like herself again, Zara said. Good, he said. And the word between them now carried the weight of everything they had learned about each other in the months since October. That good was not a small word, that I know could mean 100 different things depending on who said it and when. That love did not announce itself loudly in people who had built themselves around quiet survival but lived, instead, in the practical daily evidence of being known. That evening she asked him, unprompted, something she had been holding for a while. Your mother's order. The one she got every Thursday at the hotel. He was quiet for a moment. Grilled fish, steamed rice, barley tea. He paused. No dessert. She said the food was the event. She sounds right, Zara said. She usually was. He looked at his hands. She would have talked to you for hours, he said. She collected people she respected. You would have gone straight to the top of that list. Zara absorbed this. Tell me about her, she said. And so he did. And she listened the way she always listened, completely without looking away, and outside Seoul moved through its December evening, and inside the lamp burned low, and two people who had been surviving separately sat together and were, for the first time in a long time, simply living. It had started with a buzzer, with 11 minutes on a waiting bench, with a woman who moved through narrow spaces like water, and a man who had never waited for anything choosing to sit down and wait anyway because something in him recognized, in the time it took her to stop filling a space that needed filling, that she was the kind of person worth slowing down for. It had not been simple. It had been a fire exit counted in the dark, and a file read at midnight, and a brother's debt settled without permission, and a warehouse and a terrace and a walk-in refrigerator and a book with a turned-down page, and a water glass overflowed during 40 minutes of very professional not looking and 2 words. And yet, that had undone her on a bus ride home. It had been, in the end, 2 people who had built very careful walls calling each other's bluff until there was nothing left to hide behind, and what was underneath was simply this. Real, specific, chosen. Here is what this story is about. Underneath all the tension and the coffee and the stubborn woman who made conditions instead of confessions. It is about the cost of armor. It is about the difference between strength that protects you and strength that imprisons you. It is about a woman who had carried so much for so long that she had forgotten carrying wasn't the only option, that you could put something down without losing yourself and pick up something new without betraying everyone who needed you. It is about a man who had everything and had learned, slowly and at cost, that everything without one real thing was just inventory. It is about the radical, terrifying, ordinary act of letting someone see you clearly and deciding to stay in the room while they do. And it is, maybe most of all, about a buzzer. About the choice to wait. About the things that begin when a person who has never been made to wait for anything decides that some things are worth the bench. Zara Thomas fixed things. That was a fact about her, like her height and her blood type. But she learned, in a city she arrived in with 2 suitcases and a determination she had mistaken for armor, that some things didn't need fixing. Some things just needed room to grow, which was a different skill entirely, and one she was, with practice and patience and exactly the right amount of perfectly made coffee, learning. Thank you for staying until the last word. If this story found you at the right time, if something in Zara felt familiar, the tiredness, the carrying, the wall you built and called by a different name, then you already know the story was not only about her. Share it with someone who needs to hear that being strong does not mean being alone and that wanting something for yourself is not a betrayal of everyone you love. Like this video, subscribe if you are new here, and leave a comment telling me the moment you knew these two were inevitable. I read every single one. Until the next story, take care of yourself. Properly. Not just the empire.